So the first one is the methodological issue. And I just want to constantly sort of stress my reordering of it. It looks like finally, with guilt, conscience, resoluteness, death, anticipatory resoluteness, historicality, fate, and destiny, we now ought to have the whole of authentic Dasein in our grasp. But anything short of that, we wouldn't. So that's why I think you have to put all those pieces together first, and then you get to a point where you ask, have we now got the whole of the phenomena, so that we can, and how are we going to, and what kind of whole have we got, and how are we going to deal with it? And it seems, remember we didn't know what whole meant, and why somehow you didn't have a whole when he starts the problem and brings in death and the ahead of itself. I think it becomes pretty clear that normally by whole he means the total structure of Dasein. And what's funny is he's got the total structure of Dasein when he's got the structure of care, and he's got the structure of care already in Division 1. So it's still not clear to me what is missing. He seems to be using, as far as I can see, synonymously, Dasein being authentic, being whole, and the totality of the totalness of the phenomena being exhibited in what Dasein is doing. I'll just read you 358, one of the places where you get these three all coming together. At the beginning, the very first sentence of that section on the hermeneutic situation. And by the way, I say, well, care and selfhood aren't in the same section. I said they were. They're just contiguous. And selfhood might as well be there as anywhere. So let's go back to now at the very beginning on section 63. So in its anticipatory resoluteness, Dasein has now been made phenomenally visible with regards to its possible authenticity and totality. And I'm pretty sure that the authenticity, totality is the same as the whole. And we've now made it visible. This is connected with the thing I said at first. But how he wouldn't be able to say that if he wasn't lucky enough to be reordered by me, because he wouldn't have everything there in its totality and whole yet. He'd have lots of explaining to do about historicality at the very least coming up. But he's got it the way we've got it all total and whole. And now he tells us that as we study Dasein, we're always in a hermeneutic circle. And that's why this is the hermeneutic situation. And it's interesting that he seldom ever makes explicit the sort of rules of the game of doing a hermeneutic analysis. He goes over that very fast. It's funny how famous he is, I guess thanks to Gadamer for having introduced the hermeneutic method, when he says practically nothing about it. But he does say, when he introduces it, that there's a Vorhabe, a Vorsicht, and a Vorgriff, a forehaving, a foresight, and a foreconception, it gets translated, involved in a hermeneutic investigation, and that it moves in a circle. And he's going to bring up explicitly the circle. But if you look for it, you can see that he's doing the Vorhabe, Vorsicht, Vorgriff story as from the very beginning of the section. I'll read you the little pieces. The next sentence says, the hermeneutic situation, which was previously inadequate for interpreting the meaning of the being of care, now has the required primordiality. Dasein has been put into that which we have in advance. See, that's the forehaving. And this has been done primordially. That is to say, this has been done with regard to its authentic ability to be a whole. So there's the whole coming in again. The idea of existence which guides us. Well, now stop with that. So the first thing is we've got in our forehaving the whole structure of Dasein, and we don't so much have it because we're in it, we are it, and that turns out to be important. You have to think, well, Heidegger's telling you that, and he'll come back to this, I will at the end, that he's authentic and that he's speaking from within a total understanding or experience, primordial experience of what it is to be Dasein. On 360, there's more about that. Well, I'm getting it out of the sentence at the end of the top paragraph. Every ontologically explicit question about Dasein's being has had the way prepared for it by the kind of being which Dasein has. That's a reference to the forehaving. That says, in effect, it's from within it that Dasein is going to describe it. And then he comes to the Vorsicht, that is the foresight, and there he says, the idea of existence which guides us is as that which we see in advance, that's foresight, has been made definite by the clarification of our own most potential ability to be, and now that we've concretely worked out the structure of Dasein's being, its peculiar ontological characters become so plain, as compared with everything present at hand, that Dasein's existentiality has been grasped in advance. That's the concept. That is, grasped in advance with sufficient articulation to give sure guidance for working out the existentialia conceptually. See that? So that's somehow a foreconception. I don't find all that very illuminating, but that he never explains enough about what these terms mean that you know why he's sort of got them in here, but I'm just telling you what he clearly thinks, that he's operating out of a forehaving, and he's got a particular sense that he's already committed to looking at existence, which is the being that takes a stand on its own being. So we're inside of an understanding of being and of understanding of Dasein. We've got as our way of describing that what's essential about it is that its being is an issue for it. And we've got as our goal to work out the existentialia conceptually. Sounds sort of strange to me. Sometimes he says articulate them. I mean, I don't know what he means by conceptual, but it's now gotten such a meaning that it sounds too much like a lot of intentional content. But all it means is that he's going to now spell out and describe in explicit detail the aspects of the existential structure of Dasein. Now, so far, and we're always moving in a hermeneutic circle, it's telling us on 358. On 358, I'm surprised. That's totally the circle. Yeah, 350. Well, what I just read is moving in the hermeneutic circle. That is to say, we are inside it. And that's all we're going to hear about the hermeneutic circle for a bit. Because a great big issue comes up in the next paragraph on 359, and I have to talk about it where it comes up. And to me, it's very important, and maybe it isn't important to anybody else, and maybe I made it up, and worry about it. But I think there are two different meanings of falling. Or three, really. One of them means being absorbed in what you're doing. Another one means, I think, being so, it'll get clearer when I can only explain it when we're in it, so let me tell you more. But he's going to explain why. Let's try this angle. That he's going to tell us right now, but I'm going to come back to it, that when you do this kind of hermeneutic study, of Dasein anyway, you have to do violence to the subject, you have to wrest the truth from the subject, and so forth. Now, that means at least you have to do formal indication, and we're going to come back to that too in a minute. But what I think is that there are two utterly different reasons that he's going to give us. And he doesn't have them very distinguished. I'll show you a place where he messes up, I think, right, in putting the two different ones together in one sentence. And what are the two different ones? One is, coming up right now in italics, the entity which in each case we ourselves are is ontologically that which is farthest. And remember, that goes back to Division 1, that the being of Dasein is nearest and farthest away. And that's the claim, I think, that the background of intelligibility, it has to be transparent and not something you can study, or not something you normally thematize, and not something you can ever completely thematize. It helps to think of it as the illumination in the room. Just as the illumination isn't something you see, but it's that on the basis of which you are able to see things. So what Heidegger thinks is our understanding of being isn't something that you normally thematize and think about, but it's that, in this famous word, with that vorauf hin, everything is intelligible. Remember, being is that on the basis of which, that's the vorauf hin, everything is understood. And I'm saying the basis of which part of this is the background, and the background is pervasive and near, so pervasive and near, that it's hard to talk about. And it's covered up in that structural way, and that's one of the meanings of falling. Because so far, he hasn't said anything about why it's nearest, or why what's ontological, what he wants to talk about is ontologically farthest away, and he's going to go on now and say something that sort of goes in a different direction. Our being amidst the things with which we concern ourselves most closely in the world, a being which is falling, guides the everyday way in which Dasein is interpreted, and covers up ontically Dasein's authentic being, so that the ontology which is directed toward this entity is denied an appropriate basis. That's still compatible with, you can't understand the background, the understanding of being. Normally, you understand things, and our vocabulary and our way of studying is directed at things, and that's covering up our understanding of our being as we deal with particular beings, and that's one meaning of falling. Then a little further, the primordial way in which this entity is presented as a phenomenon is anything but obvious, if even ontology approximately follows the course of the everyday interpretation of Dasein. And now you begin to get this sort of violent language. The laying bare of Dasein's primordial being must rather be wrested from Dasein by following the opposite course than taken by the falling ontico tendency of interpretation. Well, now falling is also fleeing, in which Dasein is motivated to cover up its structure. I don't know, I haven't got a reference to the word fleeing yet, but it will come around. Or if it doesn't, anyway, it has to be in there, because if the cover-up is an attempt to hide something, I mean, there's what is hard to get a grip on because we don't have the right kind of concepts and so forth. That's this structural story about how it is hard to have a theory of an account, a phenomenological account of the structure of the background. That, I wouldn't call that a cover-up, but that he says that Dasein covers up its authentic being. That, and that you have to do violence to find it. That's a fleeing story. I mean, the ontological story isn't a cover-up. It's just a structure that is what is nearest is also farthest away, least accessible to. What is nearest and most pervasive is least acceptable. That isn't a question of a cover-up, and that's not a question I wouldn't even want to say of falling, though I think it has to come under his category of falling, as does absorption. It's a very broad category. But when you start saying that you've got to actually violently get to the truth about Dasein, that must be because Dasein is making a positive effort to fend off its and your Dasein getting at the truth. So you get this sort of, I mean, it's I think always in what he's doing. Look at the paragraph now that's begins Dasein's kind of being. We're still on 359. Thus demands that any ontological interpretation which sets itself the goal of exhibiting the phenomena in their primordiality should capture the being of this entity in spite of this entity's own tendency to cover things up. Now, that's a hiding story and a fleeing story. It's not a structural, ontological story, I think. It sounds too psychological, really. I hate it. I think the whole theme in Being and Time, the Dasein is sort of actually involved in fleeing and covering up its structure, is what Foucault calls the hermeneutic of suspicion. And I think Heidegger is an example of the hermeneutic of suspicion. Foucault's got this nice category that covers Freud, Marx, and Heidegger. That puts Heidegger in very bad company, it seems to me, ontologically anyway. And that's what he's doing right here. Because the hermeneutic of suspicion says that for some reason or other, human beings, each one, Freud and Marx and Heidegger have different arguments, are motivated to cover up the most important truth about what's going on. And that the job of somebody studying human beings, whether Marxist, Freudian, or Heidegger, is to get at this deepest truth about human beings that's covered up. And moreover, when you do get at it and can face it, it's liberating, because a lot of the misery and distortion of social life or psychological life or just plain Daseining is caused by this tendency to flee and cover up. So the job of somebody who believes in the hermeneutics of suspicion is to force people to face up to what it is they're motivated to hide. All of that I just wish Heidegger didn't have. I don't think he needs it. I think all he needs is the structural point that it's hard to do a phenomenology of a being whose basic structure is to be the basis of all intelligibility. Okay, now you can say some things about this. Yeah, Ariel. What? Well, I have figured out that he's confused. Let me give you one more thing before you say something. The clearest place where the confusion comes out, let's see, I just wrote confused in a page number. I have to find where it follows in the normal development of things. I don't know whether to look in here or to look at all of my marks. And it's going to be an anticlimax, I'm afraid. But I find it very interesting, confused. Oh, here we are. Okay, on page 363. Okay, now what is distinctive, sort of almost exactly in the middle of the page, what is distinctive in common sense is that it has in view only the experiencing of factual entities in order that it may be able to rid itself of an understanding of being. That's a fleeing story. It's just trying to get rid of an understanding of being. It fails to recognize that entities can be experienced factually only when being is already understood. That's a structural point. One of them is a kind of motivated cover-up, and the other one is, failing to do something isn't like failing to get rid of something is not, failing, I'd have to find the right words not to beg the question. You can't get rid of something without trying to cover it up, but you can fail to see it for just plain structural reasons. And so, okay, now, yes, I'm not mixed up. He's mixed up. But go ahead.
Don't really. I realize I'm disagreeing, and I haven't read that much Heidegger, but I really don't like the notion of living with Freud Marx on the basis of this like psychological. I can't take it. It's not like there's any like sort of psychological process that pushes it down or anything like that. It's just sort of the way we are in.
Yeah, one of the best statements of it is, of all people, Don Searle. I would have brought it along. He says, we are not normally in the business of dealing with the background. We don't have the language to talk about the background, and it's very hard to get people to notice it without turning it into some object. And the whole point is it's supposed to be not an object. And I like that argument. That's fine. You don't have to attribute any sort of tendency to flee or cover up, or what was this that I just had, whatever that word was. What was it? Get rid of. It isn't as if there's anybody trying to get rid of anything. Okay, well, you want to say something about this? well, yeah, though you're a straight man for this, because one of my favorite objections to Heidegger is that he has no right to base the fleeing on the fact that Dasein is exposed to anxiety. And why? Well, that's interesting. That's because in the end, Dasein, and this is again, it would be the structure of the hermeneutics of suspicion. When Dasein finally holds on to anxiety, guess what? It's joyful. So in the end, it makes no sense to say that Dasein is always fleeing or tends to flee anxiety. Why would it need to flee? Remember, anxiety isn't painful. It isn't sort of breaking out in a cold sweat and wringing your hands. Anxiety is a sense of the sort of basic spookiness of everything. And, okay, go ahead. That's right, I was trying to say. Yes. Yeah, but that just reintroduces the point. Why should we be upset by ungroundedness? I mean, this is a kind of Wittgensteinian point. I mean, it's only because is it really true that we ask for the kind of ground that Descartes was asking for and Plato was asking for, and that human beings all over need that kind? Are the people in Bali suffering from the anxiety of groundlessness and rootlessness? Or put it another way, once you accept groundlessness, you can lead a happy life. You can get married and have children and climb Everest and do whatever you want. You don't need grounds to lead a good life. Yeah. Okay. Well, then I'll just put it into Western terms. I mean, why should we think that ordinary people are suffering from this peculiar need to have grounds instead of just what? Well, but are they? Well, that's what you'd have to think, that they really are, everybody really is Cartesian, and moreover and therefore not having grounds is very upsetting to them. I mean, Heidegger's got this sort of Wittgensteinian distinction between people who think that we're all grounded somehow and that there's a reason or nature or something, the basic intelligibility that we can rely on. Then there are the people who see that there isn't any basic intelligibility to rely on, and they think you've got to say it in German, they think instead of a Grund, there's an Abgrund. An Abgrund is an abyss. This is sort of a Sartrean thing. It looks like, boy, there's no ground. We are a feudal passion. It's nihilism and terrible. And then Heidegger says, why can't we just have an Ungrund, which is a non-ground? And that's what I'm saying. And why should we be fleeing the unground as if it were an abyss when, and the answer is somehow, if it's the Cartesianism has invaded our culture, then he's got another problem. Because he says he's doing transcendental study about Dasein überhaupt, supposedly, not just Western, post-industrial Dasein or something. And, so the problem occurs all over the place. I just think fleeing he never should have bought it. It starts in the first hermeneutic of suspicion is Kierkegaard, I think. But that's a long story. Kierkegaard has at least got an interesting story about what we're fleeing. But go ahead. No, first yeah. Oh yeah?
It seems right that his sense of fleeing kind of defies the structure that would say that anxiety can be positive.
And yet that's what he thinks.
Yes.
Yeah. Anxiety is a good thing.
Yes. Sense that there's a leveling impulse in us, that it's somehow not easy to do that, and that it's much easier to have an average intelligibility and be part of Das Mann, and that's what most.
It's sort of why do people want to take it easy? I mean, there's some psychological motivation being smuggled in here, and you could sort of push it around that it shows up someplace.
Very explicit is all the structural points that he makes, but I really do think that smuggled in there is the sort of sense, like when you read the part on Das Mann, Heidegger seems to have this negative attitude about leveling, even though he could never assert that it was somehow negative.
Well, the interesting thing is, I think, that he thinks that intelligibility is essentially leveling, and there's nothing wrong with leveling. And that's again when he says authentic Dasein is always in the one, because there's no way out. I mean, you got to have the one to have any way to do anything to get outside the concrete immediate situation into some generality and so forth. So he's got to accept the one. So then the issue comes again. Why this tone of shape up and you're fleeing into the one. Why not just say, of course, the one has got to be there, but the one is something you also have to resist, but not in the sense of that you don't have to resist your tendency to flee into it. You just got to, it's a complicated story, but I'll say it again, I say it often, work your way out of the one, not by getting more and more Fronemus-like, getting more and more able to respond to the unique situation. And even then, never completely, because there's always got to be this generality of the one in order to have anything intelligible. And so now we get this question, why the motivation to, what's the bad motivation? It's to use the one to cover up our nature. And now where I'm asking again, how does he explain this motive to use the one to cover up our nature? I mean, it looks like, well, it's because anxiety is terrible, or groundlessness is terrible, or resisting television and banalities and leveling is hard. But none of it seems to it doesn't make any sense to me. Yeah.
Structural inquiry and so the only difference between an inauthentic understanding being an authentic one is that the inauthentic have fallen never.
Well, certainly you have to sort of work your way out of a kind of banality and a standard way of looking at things, which covers up what we are and everything, covers up everything practically. And now, but the question is, wait, I just slipped my mind. I have to get it back, how I want to put it. If you have to get out of that. Oh, I know, yes. But the idea that we have to use violence to get out of it and wrest the people out of it. Why don't you just, Wittgenstein manages to do a lot of this work without violence and without wresting. And, it only requires violence if the people are resisting the news you're bringing. And that's what, again, I think he has no need or right to say. Once he points this out to us, we should all just say, yeah, that's how it is. That's hard to see, but now that you point it out, I see it. Well, that's a different issue. We better put that aside. How you get to be authentic is, you do it, whether you do it by willpower or not, is a deep point we're going to come to. It's got to do with this choosing to choose issue. How much, in the background of what I'm talking about, there is going to be a problem about just how much receptivity and how much activity. But not yet. This is, all I want to talk right now is, and I've done it, is just talk about that I don't think he's motivated the violence story. Yeah, I guess I want to word it, and go ahead, but be brief. So,
it seems like maybe Heidegger just stuff that hasn't made up his mind or hasn't streamlined it enough, and it's kind of stuck between making an ontological statement, the whole world and story, the whole structural story, which is very fruitful and great, and this weird ethical statement that he.
Well, that's what I think. Yeah, and he doesn't need it, and I don't even understand where he thinks he gets it, because it sounds sort of ontic and psychological. No, you guys are monopolizing this discussion. Tyler wants to say something. To what? Okay. Yeah, well, I thought you would think that, and I'm eager to hear what you have to say about it.
But I think if you didn't say it, you didn't have to say it. Yeah, so say it's on a phenomenon. So at the structural level, there's a sort of fallenness, which is we're fallen from the world in the sense of think about the motive structure within which Dasein is socialized. So as we're socialized, we take on basically an ordinary motivational structure taken over by the.
Which is what? Oh, absolutely, that's fine. And isn't that interesting? I like that, but it's a funny thing. It's a third angle, because it isn't I'm fleeing, resisting, facing, but it isn't just structural. It's as you say, something like genetic, or I can't find the developmental. It's let's say it's developmental. That it's the way we grow up and get socialized has this built into it that we are all going to want to do the standard thing, but I'm not sure that and okay. Okay, and this violence and resting on your version is that he just has to shake you up, and he needs to shake you up because you're in the tranquility of saying, I already know how to do it, that there's a standard way to do it, and so forth. Okay, but
doesn't actually transform the mode of structure. So just seeing that one is doing things the way one does it.
okay, so we have to change that structure, and that's the violence that's going to happen. Except that it's sort of, in this book, a kind of methodological violence, and that's not going to change anybody's structure. So I'm happy if you all just have seen that there's a problem here, and if anybody wants to write a paper about it, you're welcome to do it. And I'd be shocked, but interested to see an account that makes fleeing work or motivates the fleeing. What? Yeah.
I think if nothing else, it remains compelling. And it's dangerous, of course, to try to come up with comments after that. But, I mean, I think if one imagines the situation, say, where you know somebody and they're doing a lot of work on one particular subject and they're really caught up in the world of the work that they're doing, they can't find the answer to what they're doing, and they're so confused. And you look at them without making a value judgment at the time and say, well, look, you're really caught up in what's going on. You haven't really confronted that, these terms that you're using, the definitions are very vague. You don't really understand what's going on. The grounding that you think you have, with which you perform whatever you're doing, isn't really there. And you tell this person this, and then you become very defensive. And then you get angry. And they're like, well, you can't just tell me what I'm doing.
Okay, but wait, that's enough, because that's not going to be a cover-up. The way you tell the story, that's a different issue again. Yeah, you can explain why they resist what you're telling them, and that's part of it. But the basic claim is that the whole way Dasein sets up the understanding of themselves and the world is to hide the fact that Dasein is ungrounded and to not have to experience the anxiety that comes with that realization. And you're telling me all kinds of other stories about why Dasein has trouble facing the structural things that Heidegger wants to describe. And I just want to say, well, each one of them we could discuss on its own, but I think the least tenable of all of the candidates, the developmental and the perseverant one and so forth, the least tenable is that it's built into Dasein structurally across the board that its fleeing anxiety is the main motivation for why it has the wrong understanding of the world. But I'm going to go on. I mean, I would be very unhappy if I discovered that we'd spent the whole day on this. So let me see where I am. There's a hermeneutic circle. And then there's a whole lot of questions I just run through that I just don't think he's answered satisfactorily. Is why you believe anxiety reveals the truth that nothing has intrinsic meaning? Why say that it's a basic disposedness? Does guilt really show that all our practices are ungrounded? And what does that even mean? And let's see what else. And we have to start with the arontical, everyday understanding, but we have to get out of it. So let me see. I'm skimming to get out of it here. And we want to understand why there is this systematic cover-up that obscures the structure of our being. Okay, and why isn't there enough cover-up just in the way the illumination in the room is, quote, not really covered up, but not easily accessible to us and describable. So let's see. So here we get to the violence on 359, and so that we get finally to how can we know that the ontological understanding we've arrived at is phenomenally adequate? That is, how can we ever know that we're not just part of a cover-up, and that there's any that you could ever get outside of it? And now, then that's when we're back to formal indication. The method for getting, if you're dealing with any kind of distortion, it doesn't really have to be a cover-up. the way to deal with it, and if you're all in it, because you already have this forehaving, you're not working from outside. If you're in this hermeneutic circle, the only way to get out, not to get out of the hermeneutic circle, you don't want to do that, but to get clear about the structure from within the hermeneutic circle, is formal indication. What's sort of interesting is Heidegger wrote pages and pages about formal indication in his lecture notes, and on the ones on religion have a big thing about it. If you want me to, you can ask me and I'll give you references, and it's hardly visible in here, and yet it does the crucial job. And I just want to show you, the translation just covers it up, misses it. Absolutely, probably the worst moment in the translation, it seems to me, is where he says at the top of 362. No, that's not it. 361. Yes, 361, middle of the page. Look at this. How many realize that they just, when you read the sentence, you just read a mouthful of gibberish? And did you notice, or are you is it all so much like gibberish to you that it doesn't seem like any more than any other? Look, in indicating the formal aspects of the idea of existence, that's the beginning of of the second full paragraph. What in the world can that mean, indicating the formal aspects of the idea of existence? Well, it doesn't mean anything. The German just says, informally indicating existence, which is what he did, remember, way back at the beginning when he said we'll formally indicate Dasein as the being that's being is an issue for it, and we'll call that existence. And it happens again at the bottom, at that paragraph. The idea of existence, which we have posited, gives us an outline of the formal structure of the understanding of Dasein, and does so in a way, and that's also formal indicating. But there's also a place. Oh, I just want to say that Joan Stanbaugh, I think that's nice, because it's nice that, I mean, I've always beating on Joan Stanbaugh, but in this case she's so much better than the translation. It just says, her translation, our formal indication of the idea of existence was guided by the understanding of being, and so forth. And that's straightforward and right. Okay, now, where am I? I jumped there. So this is, so how do we do it? How do we find out, get the phenomena undistorted? If, for whatever reason, and now we're just putting this under the general category, I don't want to say it's covered up. Not that there is a cover-up, just that our experience of the phenomenon of us and the world is distorted and covered up. What do we do about it? Well, we use formal indication. We assume, by the way, I worried once, which I understand now. I asked myself the question, how come Heidegger provisionally gets it right about Dasein when he gets it wrong about guilt and wrong? I mean, Heidegger thinks that we all get it wrong. Our whole shared understanding gets it wrong about guilt and death and the self, we'll see today, and informal indication always has to start out with where things are wrong. How come, when the most important thing, Dasein, is at stake, he doesn't start out with something like, we're a rational animal, or a part of nature or something? He jumps right in and tells you the right answer. Well, I always realize that's because he has written the book already, so to speak. He knows the right answer. But what puzzled me was, why then does he call it provisional? Why doesn't he just say, I know, and you will be convinced by the end of this book, that Dasein is the being whose being is an issue for it? Well, I now see what's going on. There are two it doesn't explain altogether what's going on, but one, he's understood that we are a being whose being is an issue for it. But what's provisional is that that's our essential structure. Something is provisional in that he hasn't shown it, and he won't have shown it till the end of the book. What would he be showing? Well, that if you take us to be the being whose essence, if you believe that Dasein has an essence, and you take its essence to be that it takes a stand on its being, then you can explain all the other phenomena. That's the test for the essence. I mean, the essence of gold, if it's 79, explains the ductility and the malleability and the yellowness and the conductivity and everything about gold, every causal property of gold. And in a similar way, if he gets it right about the essence of Dasein, then all the other stuff in here's got to be following from it. And it's explained, it worked out as that, as our structure. And that's what he thinks. He thinks that he knows provisionally, one of the things we do is take a stand on our being. And he's just observed that. But what he wants is to show that we have an essence, and that's our essence. And so I just wanted to say that because for me that sort of helps a little understand how, what I'm saying is unlike all the other forms of formal indication that he's got, good. You want to close it? Is that a good idea? Is it the noise or the draft or both? Okay. So he gets to formal indication on 361, even though thanks to the translation you can't see it, and he helps us to understand something on 362, which is a confusion. What is it? This is just the next point. I mean, I'm not deriving anything from that point. But it's related. The essence of Dasein is its existence. And now I want to just talk about this fact that he's using this term existence. Existence is the name for a way of being for which its being is an issue for it. That's why we study these existentials. Now there's something that's going to sort of disturb you, and it disturbed Heidegger finally, and he realized he was confused. At the top of 362, and it's all over the place, he talks about a threefold distinction of existence, facticity, and falling. And all over the place you will find that existence is his name for the future projective dimension. But existence is also his name for the whole structure. That's the way of being of Dasein. Well, that always annoyed me, and one day I discovered, thanks to the fact that the footnotes are in the Stambaugh translation, but now I have to find where it is, 315. It's right at this point where he writes something in the margin. So that means in the German 315 in the margin. I marked it. Oh, yeah, here it is. No, it isn't. Yes, he notices and he writes existence, one, for the whole of being of Dasein, and two, only for understanding. Understanding is the projecting dimension. And so he realizes that he should have used two different terms. He certainly should have. Existence is a nice term for Dasein, and the way of being of Dasein, and existentialism is already around. Kierkegaard has defined himself as an existential thinker, and doing these existentialia is all very well. Then you need a new word for the future directedness. One of the words is understanding, but we need a broader category, more abstract. And I don't have any proposal. That's his problem. But it helps to realize when you come across the term existence that it almost always means the future dimension of Dasein's activity, projection, and that. But of course, when you come across existentials, that always means the threefold structure of throne, falling, and projecting. Okay, there's nothing to discuss there. We just have to sort it out and go on. Let's see now. And now we're back to the hermeneutic circle, which he didn't name before. I named it. On 362, you get the whole hermeneutic circle going by again. And you get it carefully sort of wrapped around formal indication this time. The second paragraph, he says, this understanding is, he's talking about understanding Dasein's being. This understanding is to be grasped primordially only on the basis of a primordial interpretation of Dasein in which we take the idea of existence as our cue. There, I take it, existence is supposed to mean the whole, taking a stand of your being. Does it not then become altogether patent in the end that this problem of fundamental ontology which we broached is one in which we move in a circle? And there we are, where that's the hermeneutic situation. So we go on a little. We have indeed already shown in analyzing the structure of understanding that it's so and so it moves in a circle. That was that quick run through of the four structure in Division 1. In spite of this, if the problematic of fundamental ontology is to have its hermeneutic situation clarified, our investigation must now come back explicitly to this circular argument. When it's objected that the existential interpretation is circular, it said that we have presupposed the idea of existence, and that Dasein gets interpreted accordingly, so the idea of being may be obtained from it. But then it turns out, and we don't have to read it all, that that's the way things work. You've got to stay inside, and you've got to do formal indication to do hermeneutics. The one place that comes out, and I think it's nice to see how that hangs together, is the bottom of 362 in the italics, which are, of course, completely mistranslated, so you can't see it. But I will read it so you will see it. Skimming down, starting, so that it may decide of its own accord. Where do we have to start? So we want to let that which is to be interpreted be put into words, so that it, Dasein, may decide of its own accord whether, as the entity which it is, it has the state of being, in terms of which it should be. It's always getting the Vorauf hin wrong. So the state of being, in terms of which it has been disclosed in the projection with regard to its formal aspects. No, it's been disclosed in formal indication. I mean, so there you can just see that that's the method you've got to use when you're in a hermeneutic circle. It's in the German you can see formalen Zeigen erschlossen. That's formalen Anzeigen. Yeah, that's formal indication is what you're doing. So now we're in the hermeneutic circle, and it does that, and it needn't be violent. I'm just summarizing where I am. And then so we're back to fleeing again, and the cover-up story. I just wanted to show you that it's coming up again on 368, because when I mentioned it, I didn't go directly to the fleeing quote, because I didn't know where it was, because I put it later in my lecture. Here I am in the middle of 368. The everyday interpretation of the self, we're going to do it with the self, has a tendency to understand itself in terms of the world with which it's concerned. Now that's fine. Nobody wants to say that that's the John Searle version, which is all he needs. When Dasein has itself in view ontically, it fails to see itself in relation to the kind of being of that entity which it is itself. That's fine. What is the motive for this fugitive way of saying I? It is motivated by Dasein's falling, for as falling it flees in the face of itself into the one. Okay, so there that's the right where it says 322 in the margin. Now, I'm not quite ready to get to the self yet, though. I'm going to get there in just a minute. On 363, we still have to look at something. Well, that's the one I showed you, where they get rid of an understanding of beings and fail to recognize an understanding of being, or put side by side in a way I don't think they should be. Common sense misunderstands understanding. That's sure. That's because we normally cope with the kind of things that you understand as things. But therefore, common sense must necessarily pass off as violent anything that lies beyond the reach of its understanding. There's always this thing that because the fleeing is lurking in this paragraph, so is the violence. So Heidegger, why am I saying this in this order? So this is Heidegger explaining how we're going to get to the phenomenon when it's covered up and so forth. And the first point I was making was formal indication. And now I got a point. Our pre-ontological understanding of being is ungrounded. According to Heidegger, motivates a tendency to flee, which in turn justifies not taking das Man at face value. I mean, I think this justifies formal indication. I mean, in Heidegger's picture, because guilt is as something you owe is covering up the fact that it's not a question of owing at all, but not getting behind your throwiness. Death as an event at the end of your life covers up the fact that dying is something you're doing all the time, and so forth. And why are this all happening? Because there is a tendency to flee and into das Man. Therefore, not only is das Man too general and banal and standard to get at the real unique situation, it's also doesn't have a clue as to how to deal with Dasein. And Heidegger's explanation of that is that in order to flee ungroundedness, Dasein flees into das Man, and das Man has a view of us as objects. Let me see if there's more to say about that. I don't think so. And Heidegger, now the final point is, I'm still asking, how does Heidegger get to the phenomenon? Well, Heidegger experiences anticipatory resoluteness. He's authentic. I mean, how you get to be authentic, I haven't talked about yet, whether you do it by willpower or by grace or whatever. But Heidegger clearly sees the phenomenon, and therefore he's in a position to break out, or to just speak through, I think would be better, the ordinary way of thinking about it, and telling us his way. And this leads to something I want to get clear. Well, first there's the problem of wholeness. So what happens here? He does see the whole, but starting at right below 64. Through the unity of the items which are constitutive for care. Look at this now, the same puzzle, that he should have fixed. Existentiality, facticity, and fallenness. There it's quite clear that he's using the term in a different way than he should. It has become possible to give the first ontological definition for the totality of Dasein's structural whole. So now he's got the story of Dasein's structural whole. Remember, now this is just me trying again to justify my reordering. The issue at the beginning of Division 2 was, we haven't got Dasein's structural whole, and we have to do all kinds of things to fix that. But we've already got existentiality, facticity, and fallenness all over the place in Division 1. So what else do you get when you get the structural whole? Well, I don't really know. It's obviously what you get when you're authentic, and you get the authentic totality. This is what he's talking about at the top of 364. By exhibiting anticipatory resoluteness, we have brought Dasein before us with regard to its authentic totality, and with authentically whole. There must be some kind of inauthentic whole, so that we now have it in advance. The authenticity of the ability to be a self guarantees the primordial existentiality, guarantees that primordial existentiality is something we see in advance. He's still getting, whoever wants to write a paper on the hermeneutic, there's seeing in advance is the Vorsicht, is the foresight. He keeps using the terminology of the threefold aspects of hermeneutics, just without, signaling that he's doing anything special with it. Partly because I don't think there's anything interesting about it. I mean, that he's just pushing it in here, but I mean, I've never understood why there are these three, for having foresight and for conception, why there couldn't be four or two. But I mean, they do a good job, these three. But I bet you could think of another one. But anyway, the three are supposed to map onto the temporality structure, presumably. All right, I don't really know. That's another paper topic. He never tells us that they do, and I don't know if they do. The past, let's try it, is something like the forehaving, because the past is the always already. He's already built that into the care structure, so that what you always already in. The foresight will have to be the present, alongside entity. That's very far-fetched. And the future one is going to be the foreconception. Why? I give up. No, you can't do it. I can't do it anyway. Map it onto the threefold temporal structure. So let me go back to where I was. So now the problem of wholeness has got to be something more than just knowing this structure. It's got to be, I take it, actually experiencing fully what it is to be a throwing, falling, projecting being. And though he had the wholeness all along, he didn't have it in its richness, or something, is one of the words he uses. But Tyler.
That really one has to find something like this KPO and calculation of the is it invest in Robert's work? It doesn't need it.
Yeah, I think so. You doubt it, or you? I think that's right, but let's think about why that is. What? Does he say that even? I don't remember. He could. Okay.
Would be because he realizes the structure that just given us care, it's being ahead of himself, seems to preclude an existential identity that he could never